So for the sake of the camera, my name is Cary Tamura, and welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. Um, the We like to record all of our talks and put them on our YouTube channel, so that's what this camera is here for. So you can certainly go back and review it if you like, or share it. What we have been doing is we've been going through the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma, the path of individual liberation, book by Chogyam Trungpa, and this guy right here, and we are up to chapter 17, and chapter 17 is entitled "Taming the Neurotic Mind." And just by show of hands, who's read this? Okay. So you may have noticed, like in the guided meditation, I mentioned the neurosis of the mind a little bit, and that's because that's really what we're dealing with when we're sitting and meditating, right? Our minds are by nature, well, certainly by habit, are neurotic, and they try to distract us with all kinds of worries about the future and thoughts about the past, and when we start sitting, when we're sitting in meditation, what we're learning to do is to work with our minds. That's really what the purpose is. And without getting too far into it, I'm going to read just some parts of this and discuss it. So, taming the neurotic mind. Taming the mind is very straightforward. You just relate with things as they are. You don't try and stock up. You don't try and collect more weapons in case you might need to defend yourself, or food, or more food, so that if you run out, you would have something to live on. This is an interesting thing. I think what he's talking about here is he's talking about. Have you ever walked down the street? I don't know if I'm sure it's not just me, but once in a while I'll walk down the street and I'll be like in some kind of contentious like conversation in my head, right? So like I have a client, he's a little bit of he's a lawyer and he's a little argumentative, and that's kind of just the way he is. So I find myself like I didn't pick up one of his phone calls because I was hiking in the Adirondacks, and I found myself hiking, and beautiful day. This is like just a couple of days ago, and I'm hiking up the mountain, and I'm like having this conversation, this imaginary conversation in my head, like I imagine him being like, why didn't you pick up the phone? Like, we got to talk about this stuff. And then I had my replies like, well, because I'm hiking and I need a day off, and then this conversation goes on for a little while. Right. So meanwhile, I'm completely not present. I'm actually out in nature, which is something I love to do. Hiking is one of my favorite activities, and I'm not really there. I'm just arguing with this dude in my head, right? That's what Chogyam Trungpa is talking about here, right? He's talking about, I was like filling my quiver with arrows to like shoot at the guy if and when he attacked me, sometime in the future. This whole thing is a fabrication, right? It's my mind telling stories. It's almost like, I like to liken it to watching a little TV screen. It's almost like there's a TV playing in my head with a story that involves me starring constantly, and it's all made up stuff, and my attention is constantly diverted to the TV. So what we're trying to do, right, is we're trying to, one, notice that we're doing that, and then two, let go of that and bring our attention back to the present, right? This is the one thing that I find about talking about any of these chapters that we've talked about, is that it's one thing leads to another, and suddenly you can talk about the entirety of the meditation practice. But this is really an important part of it, taming our mind. So he says, you are not making sure that if you're kicked out of one organization, you have another organization to join. This is sort of the same thing. And then trying to stock up and make sure that there is some kind of security is the opposite of taming. It's aggression, right? There's somebody said that the need to be right is an aggressive act, right? So if you think about it, I thought that was a profound thing. I only heard it recently, but if you think about it, right? So I'm walking up the mountain of like the Hudson's on my left. It's a beautiful day, and that need to have like to prepare my argument for this imaginary conversation that I might have someday, that there was like a need, there was like an aggressive need there to be right? I wanted to be able to prove my point. And there's actually a low level of aggression there. And it's not, and just the awareness of that is important, right? Because that's part of this whole neurotic mind that we're talking about, this neurotic mind that we're trying to deal with. It just naturally throughout the course of our lives, we just automatically start worrying about things that don't exist, right? So that's one aspect of it. He also goes on to say, taming the mind is the definition of Dharma. There is no other Dharma than taming one's mind. That's basically what we're saying. The Dharma is the practice and the study, and that's what we're doing. This whole practice is about working with our minds this way. There are 4 mental obstacles. That's what this chapter is primarily focused on. The 4 mental obstacles. Ordinary neurotic mind consists of 4 basic obstacles: stupidity, mindlessness, emotional upheavals, and lack of faith. And we're going to talk about those. So stupidity is the first one. Now, the one thing about, well, let me read what he says, and then I'll tell you what I think about the term stupidity. Stupidity is a state of mind that is not open or informed. You think that if you were, and he gives an example, you think that if you were in a foreign country and you drive on the wrong side of the road, it's not your fault. That is quite different from our approach. What we mean by being educated, informed, or learned is being inquisitive enough to learn the rules and regulations for driving in that country. He focuses on inquisitiveness as an important aspect of this, an important way to work with what he's terming stupidity. So if you're uneducated, it's your own fault because you were not interested enough to find things out. Openness and the willingness to look into situations and understand them. This is, I actually don't love the term stupidity. I think just only because at this point in our culture, I feel like stupidity has a different connotation maybe than when this was written. I could be wrong. I feel like lackadaisical, lackadaisicalness is a better term. Just because the idea here, right, is that you're not willing to try and put in the effort to find something out, to figure it out, right? That example of like you're in a foreign country, you drive on the wrong side of the road. Well, it's not my fault. I'm American. When we're in America, we drive on the right, And I think that is stupidity could be one word for it. Lazy could be another, right? It's sort of like a laziness to not really care, to not really be interested enough to work with that. So the sort of positive aspect of this, right, is being curious. If you have curiosity, this can kind of combat this laziness or stupidity that is one of the obstacles. Okay. The next is mindlessness or distraction. It is the absence of awareness. You are unaware of yourself. The potential of awareness is always there, but you are mindless. Things come up and things go away, but you just ignore them. Awareness is a natural instinct. Fundamentally, we are always aware. always inquisitive. However, human beings manage to push irritating things away. In doing so, we lose that natural awareness. Cultivating awareness means regaining that instinct of inquisitiveness and sharpness. In the modern world, and I like this is very, very applicable today. In the modern world, we have all sorts of gadgets that allow us to avoid developing our awareness. If we forget something, we can always look it up in an encyclopedia or a book. I thought that was great, right? So all we have to do is replace cell phones with encyclopedia or book, and this is very, very accurate, right? So I am certainly I'm certainly guilty of this. One thing that I think about too, I think everybody here probably is maybe not old enough to remember, like, before cell phones, right? The cell phones stored all the numbers, all your phone numbers. And what did we do before that? We remembered all the phone numbers that we had to remember, or most of them, right? Or we wrote it down and put it in our wallet or something. But it's actually, this is kind of a silly example, but a real example of like something where, okay, yeah, like I don't have to remember I literally don't know my wife's cell phone number. I do not know her number. It's in my phone. If I lose my phone, I will have to email her to find out if she's not around. I think I'm working on. I'm going to work on memorizing her phone number, but it's, yeah. Maps. Like, remember, like, you would remember how to get places. You would write it down. You'd have never, ever. I've lived in New York City now for, most of my life, the majority of my life. I take the subway everywhere. I know, like, every stop on the subway, basically, in some ways. I still use my phone to tell me how long it's going to take me and which train I should use a lot of the time, because it's good at it too. But so anyway, sorry. So but this is the point about mindlessness, right? So this is about distraction, mindlessness. Like we can be completely mindless. Like you could be like a zombie, a walking zombie. Like I do that every morning when I wake up to go to work. I wake up, I walk to the subway. On the way walking to the subway, I might already be on my phone. Sometimes I'm working, but other times I'm just like going through Facebook, or I'm going through Instagram, or I'm like reading articles. And there's varying degrees of mindlessness there, right? But we see this all the time in our daily lives, just walking down the street. Like people are mindlessly going through their lives as they are not paying attention to where they're walking. And how many times have you walked down the street and seen, and something woke you up out of your mindlessness, and suddenly you're aware that maybe maybe there's a car coming and it's going to hit you, or maybe it's a beautiful day and you didn't notice, right? This is that kind of mindlessness that is created by distraction, and awareness is sort of like the opposite of it, right? Is if we become aware of what's actually happening around us, then it combats this mindlessness. He says the last thing on mindlessness, he says we need to get that awareness back. And that's, again, the way we start to develop awareness is the same way that we were just sitting and just practicing meditation. We sit and we practice awareness, right? We practice mindfulness. We practice being aware of what's going on right now by not getting lost in mindless distraction, right? The next obstacle is emotional upheavals, also known as the kleshas. In relationship to emotional upheavals, the other three obstacles are a kind of fringe, a way of copping out of the emotions. People usually want to be somebody or something important. They want to achieve something. Therefore, they express themselves in terms of the three basic poisons of passion, aggression, and ignorance, or in terms of jealousy, envy, or some other emotion. we could talk for a long time. We could do many classes just on the kleshas, just on the emotion, the passion, aggression, and ignorance. But for the moment, let's just say that what he continues to say is emotional uptightness comes from wanting to stick to your own identity and to your own importance. However, trying to hold on to your identity by means of emotional uptightness is unnecessary and just creates further pain. So what does that mean? That I like to give examples from my life because I don't like to, necessarily point out other people's things. I was a musician for a long time, and I saw this happen with a lot of my musician friends and for myself, which is like you build up an identity, right? I'm the kind of person who I'm a musician. I'm like a rock musician, and I live in New York City. I'm a starving, struggling artist, and that's my identity. And at a certain point, actually, after a lot of meditation, and some life changes and getting older, I kind of let go of that, right? I let go of that. I kind of realized that my priorities had changed. I still, every once in a while, I kind of want to cling to that idea of who I am, right? I was like, I'm a musician, and I'm like, I'm an artist, whatever it is, and that clinging to these ideas of who we think we are, those can create problems for us, right? One of the biggest problems in this context is that they sort of take us out of the situation. They take us out of the moment. They make us not present, because instead of reacting to whatever our situation is or relating to ourselves very directly and honestly, we kind of interject these ideas about how we think things should be, right? Well, because I'm a musician, I don't wake up at 6 a.m. every day. I sleep in because I do my best work at night. That's a perfect example, right? And it could be whatever our identity, whatever we like to think of ourselves as, these things kind of get in the way, and they kind of create a little bit of emotional tension if you have to let them go. So that kind of that tension is almost always born out of some sort of passion, aggression, ignorance. It's built out of things that usually I think come down to a fear-based situation, some kind of anxiety that we have. Well, if I'm not a musician, then what am I? I'm a real estate agent. If I'm not a real estate agent, what am I? If I'm a good person, right? If I'm not a good person, what am I? That's very anxious. It can make me very anxious. If I can't define myself, if I can't cling to these ideas of who I am, those anxieties, these things, they create this stuff that we work with when we sit. These emotional things, they get at us, right? Insecurities get at us. Insecurities are always based around who we kind of feel we are, or who we should be, or who we ought to be. Those emotional upheavals, that is an obstacle to being present. A lot of times, it's not necessarily big ones, but little. They can be very little ones. Just when you're sitting, I think a good example for me too is when I'll sit and I'll be worried about something I got to do for work. Well, what's the problem with not worrying about something that I have to do for work while I'm meditating? Well, because maybe that thing won't get done, and then I'm going to look bad at work, and then what? I'm going to lose my job. Next thing you know, I'm homeless, and I'm living on somebody's couch, and this all happens in my mind while I'm sitting trying to meditate and focus on my breath and be present. Right? It's an emotional impetus for those things, oftentimes fear. So, all right, lack of faith. And this is the last one, lack of faith. The fourth aggregate is not having enough faith. Not having faith in yourself, not having faith that you actually can achieve what you want to achieve. You give up altogether. Theistic religions may tell you not to question, but just have faith. The Buddhist view of faith is the opposite of that. You should think for yourself. Faith means that you can do it. Faith needs a kind of surrendering to oneself. I think this one is fairly straightforward. Right? Don't need to unpack that a lot. Faith in this case means, or not. The obstacle of not having faith is sort of answered by having faith, believing that you're on the path, believing that if you're inquisitive enough and you don't let your emotional upheavals distract you too much, that you can figure this out. Pretty simple. So, so the opposite of lack of faith would be faith, and that's the positive. And then let me just talk a little bit about this. So he goes on to say, in shamatha, which is this style of meditation, of focus, you witness your stupidity. You witness your stupidity. That's an important word, witness. You witness your unawareness. You witness your emotional upheavals and your faithlessness. By doing so, you are taming your mind. The term taming does not mean that you're trying to work with your mind so that everything is smooth and good. Taming means that you feel there is a relationship taking place between you and your mind. When you sit and meditate, you do not necessarily become a great meditator, sitting for an hour a day without any thoughts. You don't necessarily find yourself completely smooth. That is almost impossible. And that is not the point. Taming the mind means some kind of friendship is taking place between those four obstacles and you. And there's so this Chogyam Trungpa's son wrote a book called Turning Your Mind into an Ally. And I think that in a way, again, if I were to take just maybe a slightly different take on the word taming, like taming your mind, I feel like making friends with your mind is almost a little bit better, right? Turning your mind into an ally, becoming familiar with your mind. Because we're not trying to sit and force our minds to be a certain way. We're trying to actually just face our minds, see what they're doing as we sit and meditate, and just become familiar with it. We're just trying to understand what are our minds actually doing. We feel like we're in control of our minds, but if you think that you're in control of your mind, try and sit for 20 minutes without like breaking your concentration or your awareness of your breath. I would pretty much guarantee you that unless you're an enlightened being, no one here can do that. It's just very natural. But it's becoming aware of the way that our minds work that is so important. It's the key to working with our minds. Working with our minds does not mean forcing our mind to focus on one thing and one thing only. Working with our minds is learning to become friendly with it, to become aware of the tricks and the habits that our minds have. That's really what we're doing when we're taming our mind. We're just becoming aware of it. And that's less beholden to it. So, so this last part I'll say two things. A basic point of Hinayana training, which is what we're doing, is the conviction that you can practice along with your problems. Right? It is not because you can solve your problems that you can do it. And it is also not because somebody else suddenly became enlightened. The point is that you can do it because somebody else did not become enlightened and still was a follower of the path. The spoiler about that is that it's really not about the destination, right? We talk about this practice as a path, and the thing that you hopefully learn or increasingly become aware of is that the destination is really where you are right now at all times, right? It was kind of like we go on this long journey of practice to just come back to realizing that what we are looking for is right here with us all the time. I mean, this is kind of like a cliche, right? We always talk about life is about the journey, not the destination, but it's really true, you know. And the journey is right now, all the time. So, and then the last thing that I thought this is really interesting. So, I run meditations in Times Square a few times a year. We have one coming up June. I forget the date. And June, like meditation in Times Square, if you've never tried it, is I think it should be like a meditator's bucket list kind of item. You should absolutely go and meditate in Times Square. Why? Because Times Square is the one place that I, and probably anybody else here, if you're a New Yorker, would like to avoid at all costs, unless you absolutely have to go there. Obviously there's tons of distraction. There's lights and sound and traffic and people and music and all kinds of stuff. And that's actually what makes it a great place to meditate, right? It's because there's so much stuff trying to like make you self-conscious about you're sitting in public and you're trying to meditate. Like, these are great things to work with. And when I read this last part, this is the last paragraph, I thought of this. So he says, the process of meditation brings out the details of the four mental obstacles, and it brings out their positive counterparts as well. The Kagyu lineage is known for its tough people, great meditators like Milarepa and Marpa. At the same time, if you put Milarepa and Marpa in the middle of New York City, they might be very soft and vulnerable. So maybe they were not such tough people, but they had faith and they knew how to handle themselves. Because of that, something actually happened in their systems, their state of being, so that they could walk on a spiritual path. And so with that, I just recommend that you guys all come meditate in Times Square with me at some point in June. So, I hope that is clear. It kind of touches on a few different points, like ego and emotions and all this stuff, but I feel like that is a good explanation of the mental obstacles and their opposites. With that, does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I had difficulty with this chapter. Let me give you a mic.
Oh yeah, we have a mic. That's right. Oh. Oh.
I'm the gimpy. Is it working? Yeah. I had difficulty with this chapter.
Yeah. No.
I had difficulties with this chapter.
I'll repeat I think it's running out of batteries. That's usually what it does when it runs out of batteries. So if we have.
Pass it to me. I'll put some batteries in it while he repeats.
I had difficulty with this chapter. I don't know if it's because I was thinking in absolutes or what, but I found it was so contradictory. I'm really happy that you start off the talk addressing the words stupidity. I think ignorance is a slightly softer term, but not much softer. But and then the part about turning to an encyclopedia as like being a cop-out. By today's standards, an encyclopedia is a treasure. You have to go out of your way to go to the library to read a book.
Yeah.
So there were certain things in this chapter that just weren't resonating with me. I just have to voice it because I don't know if I'm just thinking too just an absolute, not relatively thinking, or what.
I think that if that's your point, I think that you're right to notice those things, and also why I try to point those things out as well, right? Because as time goes on, the way the teachings really have to be relevant to the people that you're teaching, right? And as generations change, there's a lot of stuff that stays the same about human beings, you know, and our minds and our emotions, but there's also a lot of stuff that changes. And I think that's why, you know, it's a great point about, you know, actually going to find an encyclopedia or going to the library. Like that would actually take quite a bit of dedicated effort in our opinions, I guess. And but I think the key is to notice, right, that the point, the main point, once it's adapted for modern times, like cell phones making people into like kind of mindless zombies, right? You know, like that. I think is something that we can all relate to, and that's really what the teaching is saying. That's really what the book is saying. It just does have to have that little bit of cultural translation, you know.
I need to reread it.
Yeah. But I think, and again, stupidity. Like my wife actually is a psychologist, and she works with kids who have learning disabilities and behavioral disorders and stuff. And it makes me very sensitive to stupidity as a term, right? Because it's not that there's anything inherently wrong with the term, but really what we're talking about, like what he's talking about in the part about stupidity, has little or nothing to do with our intelligence, right? Like you could be a very smart person, but exhibit stupidity in the way he's describing it. But that's why I feel like, you know, calling it, maybe think of it more as a laziness or a lackadaisicalness, and not putting in the effort, you know, to understand or to be inquisitive.
But that's where it comes in. That's where going to the encyclopedia is inquisitiveness to learn, or even Google it.
Yeah.
So I really need to work this out myself.
Yeah, sure. I have a feeling John wanted to say something in relation to that.
Yeah, I've been reading studies, and I met a person who's an expert on the effect of screens in our culture on children. And one of the effects is that kids who spend their days, you know, glued to screens, as children do today, much more than certainly in previous generations, lose the ability to some degree. They're to read other people's emotions. They're not as sensitive to what's going on in another person's face because they're not trained. They're not responsive. And then when people stop using screens, they begin to develop that capacity very rapidly. And I think that what he's talking about is, by what he means by stupidity, is absorption in entertainment. You know, that we get absorbed in entertainment of one kind or another on a screen. For instance, you know, you watch television or my daughter watches TV programs on her iPhone, you know, and that you lose contact with the world and you lose inquisitiveness. And inquisitiveness is a great virtue of enlightened mind, because that mind is open, aware, sensitive to the present moment, and very curious. You know, very curiosity is seen, inquisitiveness is seen as a virtue. The more enlightened, the better that inquisitiveness becomes. But it's dulled out by absorption in entertainment. You know, we go to sleep. We get lost in movies and books and our phones.
Yeah, especially these days, it's immediate gratification world we're living in right now.
If nobody has any burning questions right now, I actually would like to do a little exercise before we end. And this is it's going to require us to partner up. So there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Perfect. And what I was thinking we could do is I would like to, it's going to be a 2-part practice. So we're going to split up into pairs. And one person is going to talk and one person is going to listen. And what the person who is talking is going to do, and then we're going to switch off. I would like you to think of at least two of the obstacles we just talked about, right? So, and just describe to the person a way that you've experienced it in your own life, right? So, if it's I recommend trying to find ways that, you've exhibited some of these obstacles, right? So if you have these neuroses, if you can describe it in a way that it affected your interactions with somebody or with a situation. And if you're not comfortable with that, that's okay too. You can also just describe an experience that you had with that, or you saw it in someone else. And then we're going to do that for 5 minutes. And while your partner is talking, the other person's job is really to hold space for the person who's talking and just listen. And the listening is important as a practice. You're going to do the same thing that we were doing in meditation, in the sense that your goal is to kind of just be open and listening to what the person is saying. You're not going to give them advice. You're not going to engage in a conversation, but just be there to listen. And when you notice your mind starting to be like, oh, relating to, like, oh yeah, I know, I've totally had that experience too, or you notice that your mind, you're starting to get, you're starting to drift off and get distracted by something, just let go of whatever that is and bring your attention back to the person that's talking to you. This might be a good exercise for teenagers who spend too much time on their phones. And then we're going to switch. Yes, I'm going to recap yeah. So you can start thinking about it. The two, at least two of these 4 things. We have lackadaisicalness, we'll call it, or stupidity. Mindlessness, right? The distraction. Emotional upheaval. Any of these aggressive emotions or anxious emotions that kind of distract us, make us not present, make us react. And lack of faith. Any way that you've experienced not believing that you had the ability maybe to understand a situation or to follow a path. It'd be great if it were a Buddhist meditative path, but I don't know. But so yeah, does that sound good? Okay, so why don't do you guys, I prefer it if you don't know each other. So maybe if you two could go together, could you two guys go together? Do you guys know each other? I mean, okay. And maybe you and John and the 2 you guys in the back. What's that? No, we're good. I'm the odd number. All right, and we're going to do 5 minutes. You can decide who's going to talk first. And begin. Stupidity, mindlessness, emotional upheavals, and lack of faith. All right, 1 minute left. Start to wrap up. All right, guys. Now you can switch. And remember, we're talking about lackadaisicalness, lackadaisicalness or stupidity, mindlessness. What are the other two? For faith and emotional upheavals. And then the other person, you're just listening, using listening as a practice. Go ahead. One minute left. All right, guys, you can start to wrap up now. Once you get started, it's hard to stop. Once you get started sharing, and sometimes it's hard to stop. All right, folks, if you want to come back to sit. So, I guess what I'd like to be, before we end, I was curious if anybody had anything that they wanted to share, any either questions about it, or did anybody, I don't know, have any realizations or anything that they would like to share as far as it's related to the teaching. Yeah.
I think it's interesting when you asked the question because I became aware.
Oh, does that work? The battery switched? Okay, sorry.
I think it's interesting the question what you asked about taming the mind, because I became aware in my conversation of having been a practitioner how I work with these different things that come up. So it wasn't like a major big deal, because as I was speaking, I was realizing that the little mindfulness that happened to do something was very important, because I had faith in working with something in emotional upheavals. So in the conversation, I had an awareness.
That's great.
I have something to say.
I think the thing I would say is that I feel like regardless of our practice, right, and whether you've been doing this for a little while or for a really long time, a lot of these same things come up, right? And one of the things that I'm very grateful for is the fact that I have found this path and these teachings, and it actually gives me a set of tools with which to work with these things, right? We don't always, some of our coping mechanisms are not always the most precise things. Sometimes we have positive ways of coping with things, of things that afflict us, of working with our neurotic mind, and sometimes we have negative ones. And the more we practice and the more we study this stuff, the more we have like a tool set. It's like a toolkit that we can reach in and be like, oh, I can actually work with these things that bother me. These habits of mind, these neuroses. So I think, yeah, could you pass the mic, please? Just hit the bottom once. Just.
Yeah, so this goes back to what I was talking about before. I mean, my issue with the chapter was almost an emotional upheaval for me. And discussing it here just now was part of my process of coming to terms with and understanding what that was about. It's not over, but it was part of the process, and it started on the path, on the road for it. So that was a good thing. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm always amazed at the nuance of our neurotic minds and how it's able to like work its way into anything. We can be like, I meditate every day for 3 hours a day, and I'm like, but it's still our minds figure out ways to like hijack our brains and just kind of run away with certain neuroses, and things that we don't realize are emotional to us are actually emotional. Things that we don't realize that we're like, we don't realize when we're distracted or mindless. And it's always there, no matter how long we practice, but it becomes more and more recognizable, right? And more we get more and more friendly with it. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's about having faith in the practice. And I had a conversation with one of my friends. He said that, well, what if you get rid of all this thing, Then life is total equilibrium. Wouldn't that be very boring? And I tell him, don't worry, you have a
way to go.
Yes, you have a lot to deal with. It's not going to get too boring too soon for you.
I would also add to that I do think it's a beautiful thing that the path, you do require, it does require a little bit of faith, but the faith in this case is not like taking anybody's word for it. The faith is just is actually going and doing the practice and seeing for yourself. And that's a big difference and a beautiful thing, right? Have a little faith that this path, has something to it, and try it out for yourself and see. And it becomes self-evident, I think, with enough practice, which is awesome. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think with that we should end. And what we do is we like to dedicate the merit at the end of these talks. And what we're going to do, Wen is going to pass out a sheet, and the dedication of merit for people who have never done it before. You don't have to chant it if you don't want to. But what we're actually doing is we're basically taking this practice that we've just done, and we're dedicating it not just for ourselves but to the rest of the world, so that our practice is not just a selfish one, right? And I'm going to need a sheet too, because I get nervous when I teach and might forget them. Thank you. So, by this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. And I want to thank you guys all for being a part. It's always a group effort. So thank you for contributing and being here tonight.